In this video, we're going to put together the code that's responsible for enabling and disabling the display name and email text fields. What I mean by that is when we enter our profile activity, I want the display name and the email fields to be disabled. Then, when you press a button on the action bar, I want them to become enabled, and for you to have the opportunity to either save your changes or back out and don't save your changes. Now, the way I'm going to implement this is through a pretty interesting and awesome feature of Android that came around in Android 3 called a Contextual Action Bar. And a Contextual Action Bar is this little action bar replacement doohickey thing that pops down from the top of the screen and allows basically you can think of it as replacing your action bar temporarily with a new set of items. And it's, well, like its name implies, it's contextual, so it only shows up when it's needed. So we're going to use the contextual action bar to implement our confirm or cancel concept for editing our display of or editing our profile. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to jump into our activities, and I'm going to go ahead and jump into our profile activity. I'm going to start off here at the top, and basically what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to write out a bunch of all of our private members that we're going to need in this video. So it might not seem clear why we need some of them, but we will. So we'll just write out all our private members, and then we'll go from there. Now, the first private members that I want to write out are going to keep track of what I'm going to refer to as the state of the activity. Basically, I'm going to have a private static final int state viewing and set that to 1, and a private static final int state editing, and I'm going to set that to 2. Now, these two states, these two constant variables or constant values, are referring to what state the current activity is in. And in this case, I'm gonna kind of create the concept of two states. You have your viewing state where your display name and your username are both disabled, and your editing state where they're enabled and you have the contextual action bar appearing. So in addition to declaring the two constants, I'm also going to declare a private static final string bundle underscore state. And I'm going to call it bundle state. What is this for? Well, when we rotate the device, remember that our activity gets destroyed and recreated. We want to keep track of what state we were in before the device rotated. Which, speaking of keeping track of what state we're in, I'm going to add a private instance variable called current state. Next up, I'm going to add a private edit text for our display name text, and a private edit text for our email text. In addition, I also am going to need a reference to our tap to change avatar button. So I'm going to say private view change avatar button. So that's going to keep that reference there. And then we're going to need something that isn't entirely obvious quite yet, but it's going to be a private action mode, which is going to come from in this case, it's going to come from the android.view namespace, and we're going to call this something like, how about edit profile action mode? So what is this? The action mode object is responsible for keeping track of the contextual action bar that's being displayed. We will talk about this more later. For right now, just take it for granted that we need this particular local variable to implement what we want, or local field, sorry, to implement what it is we want to do with our profile. So we will implement that later, and everything will be awesome. Okay, so now what I'm going to do here is, first of all, now that I need a reference to my change avatar button, remember that code I wrote that says find view by ID, RID, activity profile change avatar? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say change avatar button equals find view by ID r.id change avatar, and I'm writing this code immediately underneath the code that gets the avatar progress frame. Then what I'm going to do is this entire find view by ID call, I'm going to replace it with the variable, because now we have a variable that is a reference to that particular control. We don't need to inline the find view by ID anymore. Next up, I'm going to get a reference to our display name text. So display name text equals edit text find view by ID r.id display name, so activity profile display name, and of course we'll need our email text as well. So edit text, bind view by id, r.id email, which is going to be activity profile email. So now we have a reference to all the controls that we need. Now what I'm going to do is, let's remove that blank line there, so kind of group our things together. Now, at the end of Yondura create, I'm going to say get support action bar dot set type. Well, actually, before I do that, I'm going to say user equals user equals application get auth get user. So I'm going to get a reference to our user. Then I'm going to say get support action bar dot set title, and I'm going to pass in user dot get display name. So we're setting the title of our toolbar to the display name of the user. What we're also going to do is we're also going to say display name text dot set text and set that to user get display name. So we're setting the edit text for our display name to what the user is, and then our email text set text user dot get email for that. The final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to invoke a method that hasn't been created yet. I'm going to say change state, and I'm going to pass in state viewing. So what's going on here? Well, you know the whole thing I was talking about states, how we're going to be either in state viewing or state editing? The change state method is going to be the method that's responsible for switching between viewing and editing modes. So that's why we're invoking that method, and we're doing it there because the default state is going to be state viewing. So yeah, now that we've done that, now we can go ahead and add in our action bar options menu for our profile activity. So to do that, of course, we're going to need to implement the on create options menu and the on options item selected methods. I'm going to do that all the way down here at the bottom, just to kind of keep our profile code kind of clumped together. And so down here, I'll write the code responsible for switching states. So I'm going to say override public boolean on create options menu. Of course, it's going to receive a menu parameter. And I'm going to say get menu inflator dot inflate r dot menu dot activity underscore profile. And then, of course, pass in menu as the second argument. And then we're going to return true because we did something to this menu. Now let's go ahead and implement our menu real fast, just because this won't take, this will only take a second. I'm going to put my keyboard cursor here on the red, hit Alt Enter to auto-generate that, that menu resource for me. And I'm going to add one item in here. And the item is going to have an ID of activity profile menu edit. It's going to have an icon of drawable IC action edit. It's going to have a title of edit, and it's going to have an app : show as action set to always. And now that I've done that, of course, I can hit Alt Enter to import that XML namespace up at the top and have it auto-populated to the correct value. So now if I were to change my preview theme to material, you see now we have our edit button. All right, so that's our menu, pretty straightforward. Now let's jump back into profile activity, and let's go ahead and implement our on options item selected method. So I'm going to say override public boolean on options item selected menu item item. And then in here, I'm going to say int item ID equals item.get item ID. Then I'm going to say if item ID equals r.id.menu edit, so activity profile menu edit, then change state editing. And of course, in this case, we'll return true, but the default case will return false to indicate that we didn't handle this options menu item, but return true if we did. All right, so that is basically our on options item selected. So now all we really need to do at this point is implement our change state method as well as our contextual action bar. So I guess let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and write a private void change state int state method. And the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to say if state equals current state. If we're switching to the state we currently are, then just return. Then I'm going to say current state equals state. And then I'm going to say if state equals state viewing, do one thing. And I'm going to create an else if state equals state editing, do another thing. and then I'm going to create an else throw new runtime exception, or argument exception, a legal argument exception, sure, invalid state. Okay, so now our change state method is kind of stubbed out. We have two main conditions that we want to implement. One that if we're on the state viewing and one if we're on the state editing. So for the state viewing, what we're going to do is we're going to say display name text set enabled false, email text set enabled false, and edit avatar or edit profile, or sorry, avatar, change avatar button dot set in, or set visible in this case, view dot visible. And then we got to do something a little bit weird. I'm going to say if our edit action mode does not equal null, then edit profile action mode dot finish and edit profile action mode equals null. So what am I doing here? I'm saying if we ever do a change state into viewing, dismiss our contextual action bar. So get rid of the additional action bar that'll pop in for the top by telling our action mode to finish, by invoking that finish method. Okay, so let's go ahead and do state editing now. State editing is basically mostly going to be the opposite. So I'm going to say display name text set enabled is true, email text set enabled is true, change avatar button dot set visibility, visibility.gone. And the last thing we need to do is just like view.gone. Sorry about that. Last thing we need to do is also going to be a little weird. This is how you enter a contextual action bar or action mode. You say, I'm going to say edit profile action mode equals toolbar dot set or start action mode, and then I'm going to pass in a new instantiation of an object, and this object I'm going to call edit profile action callback. So this class has not been created yet, but before we create it, let's talk about what's going on here. In order to start a contextual action bar, all you have to do is tell the toolbar to start an action mode, and then you pass in an instantiation of a callback interface. You saw that parameter, right? Callback. So if you pass in an instantiation of the callback interface into start action mode, it will start the action mode. And it'll also return the action mode itself, which will allow us to finish it when we're done with the change state, as you see right there. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and implement our callback, basically. So what is our callback? Our callback object, our callback class, is what describes the contextual action bar. So it seems easy enough. Let's go ahead and write a private class edit profile action callback. Now I'm not making this static, so it will be an inner class, and I'm going to have it implement action mode dot callback. Then, because we're implementing this interface, we need to make sure that we implement all its members. So I'm going to hit Alt Enter, Enter, Enter. And now you see the list of all the members that we need to implement. So we have on create action mode when the action mode is, well, created. Notice how it passes in a menu. See, that's really cool. It passes in this menu. The menu is going to be the menu options that display on the contextual action bar. Then we have on prepare action mode, which is equivalent to the on prepare options menu in the activity. We have on action item clicked, which is equivalent to our on options item selected method. And we have on destroy action mode, which, well, it happens when the action mode has been destroyed. So, yeah, let's go ahead and implement this. Let's start off with the onCreate action mode. The onCreate action mode, I'm going to go ahead and inflate a new menu. I'm going to say get menu inflator, which this get menu inflator method, by the way, is coming from the activity, the parent activity object. I'm going to say inflate, and I'm going to pass in r.menu.activity profile, and then I'm going to pass in underscore edit, and then I'll pass in menu as a second parameter. And then I'm going to go ahead and say return true to indicate that we created a menu. So remember, this on create action mode is very similar to our on options created thing method. So now let's go ahead and implement this menu really quickly. So I'm going to hit Alt Enter, Enter, And this menu is menu is only going to have one item in it, and it's going to be the item, the check bar, the check mark, the item that indicates that we are done and we want to commit our changes, because the cancel button always appears by default in the contextual action bar. We'll see that in a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an item. I'm going to give it an ID of +ID / activity profile edit, and then we'll say menu done. I'll give it a title of save. I'll give it an icon of drawable icy action done. And I'll give it an app show as action and set it to with text in this case. We'll go ahead and do that. We'll say create namespace declaration so we get our XML namespace at the top. So now if I zoom out and do a quick preview just to make sure that I did everything correctly. Okay, so our save is now coming on into the overflow. We'll leave it at that, as that, and see what happens when we actually, nah, I'll just go ahead and say always to force it up as an icon. There we go. I like that more. Now let's hop back into profile activity, and, yeah. Our on prepare actions mode, we don't need to worry about. And our on action item clicked. Now we do need to worry about this. This is where we would actually be performing our logic for committing our new display name and our new email. What I'm going to do here instead, however, is I'm going to go ahead and say int item ID equals item get ID. And I'm going to say if item ID equals r.id activity profile, and we'll pass in edit menu done. And then I'm going to say, I'll put in the to-do, and I'll say send request to update display name and email once we get our backend logic in place. But for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say user equals application.getAuth.getUser, user set display name text dot get text, and then I'll say user dot get text dot toString. I mean user set email, and I'll set the email to email text get text toString, and then I'll go ahead and I'll do the same thing. Well, no, in this case I don't need to worry about that because our edit text themselves have already changed their values to whatever the user typed in. So now what I can do is I can simply say return true, and I can, well, before I return true, I'm going to change state back to state viewing. So when we hit done, we'll change state back to viewing, and everything will be awesome. Alrighty, so now what I want to do is let's go ahead and implement our onDestroy action mode. That's going to be pretty straightforward. All I'm going to do is I'm say if current state does not equal state viewing, then change state to state viewing. So what this means is when we hit the cancel button on the contextual action bar, it will then change back into state viewing. And that's it. Let's go ahead and hit play and see if this works. I really should have launched it directly, shouldn't I? You can, like I said in the last video, you can launch things directly, but in this case I was just not thinking about that. Okay, so we have our Nelson LeKay and our email. The reason emails looks like that is because our email is blank. Now let's hit this edit bar and check that out. Our contextual action bar appears at the top. And we can change our email and our display name, and we can hit save, and it becomes disabled. We can hit edit, we can also hit cancel, and we go back into how we were before. So now, all we have left to do is, I want to make this contextual action bar at the top, I want to make it overlay the activity. I want it to appear over my toolbar. So, to do that, what we have to do is jump into our style. So that's going to be under our resource folder, values, styles. And then under my app theme, I'm going to say item name equals action mode, or sorry, window action mode overlay without the Android prefix, because remember we're working with app compat, and I'm going to pass in true. So now, this time I am going to go ahead and I'm going to launch the profile activity directly. I can do that by right-clicking profile activity and saying run profile activity. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'll go ahead and select, in this case, we'll just worry about doing the running on the phone, not the tablet, since we've already tested both of those things. And it seems to have not wanted to launch that. Oh, right. It's not going to launch that because we're not authenticated. That's okay. Let's go ahead and jump into Profile. Let's hit Edit. And now when we hit Edit, notice how the Contextual Action Bar replaces our normal toolbar. So now we get a cool little effect there. All right, I think that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to do here. There is one thing, actually. I just remembered. I wanted to do this. I wanted to say this to last. Now that you guys can see what a contextual action bar is and does, watch what happens when I do this. I'm going to hit Edit, and then I'm going to rotate the device. Now, here's a problem. Our contextual action bar disappears. So let's go ahead and fix that. What I'm going to do here, it's going to be a pretty simple fix. All I have to do is jump into Profile Activity, and I'm going to implement the onSaved state. So remember that method that's invoked when we save the state, the instant state of the activity when the activity is about to be destroyed? I'm going to implement that. I'm going to say override public void onSave instance state bundle saved state, and then I'm going to invoke the super method first, onSave instance state, passing in save state, and then I'm going to pass in save state dot put int, and I'm going to pass in bundle state, comma current state. Now that we're saving the current state, we can go ahead and reload the current state inside of our onEuraCreate method. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and wrap these 3 lines of code in if saved state. Now remember, I'm in onEuraCreate right now. The method's kind of getting a little long, unfortunately. I'm going to say if saved state does or equals null, then do this default behavior of setting our display name text and our email text and changing our state to viewing. Otherwise, I want to change our state to save state dot get int, passing in bundle state. So that will relaunch our contextual action bar. So now let's go ahead and hit play. And log in. And log in. And go to Profile. And enter our contextual action bar. Modify our text. Rotate the device. And now you see we're still in our contextual action bar, even though the device has been rotated. All right, so I think that wraps up what I wanted to do in this video with the profile. And we'll see you guys in the next